he's the one that's going to keep the clock. So, but don't want to take the time that I took to rob you from the opportunity to ask questions. So, any questions out there for any of us or the collective all? Mike.
Okay. Appreciate all of you being here. Thank you for your service, Colonel Mitchell, Colonel Baumgartner, and other gentlemen on the civilian side. I think the frustration that is being felt, at least on some levels, with levy and drainage districts is how do you go from being an award-winning levy maintenance system that's been awarded recognition for a high level of maintenance and operation to being out of the PLA 499 program and still complete the same types of levee maintenance that we do and not experience repetitive failures during flood events. I think that's a frustration we're seeing, and at least from my perspective, it's regulations. Any comments on that?
Charles. Thank Mike very much. Thank you for that question. Just to, if I don't say this right, Mike, correct me. So he's describing the frustration of being in the rehabilitation program, maintaining high levels of maintenance, and then also get to a point where you're rendered inactive because you're not meeting specific standards. And how does that happen? Okay. So one of the things that we're very aware of in terms of frustration from levee drainage district is particularly the evolution of not only the PL 8499 rehabilitation program over time, but also the evolving and evolution of Section 408, particularly from 2005 on. And so knowing that over time that there has been an evolution, I'll use the 408 as an example, where you see a program in many ways is becoming more formalized over time, and is easily could be interpreted as increased regulation too. That's a component to this frustration. We're very much aware of it. Same with the PL 8499 and the rehabilitation program. As we know, is inspection standards over time have changed. The last change was when we went to the 18 points that were of higher priority than the other inspection points during the inspection process. And then, of course, if you're rendered an unacceptable rating on any one of those 18 points, for example, under current guidance, and Rodney, you correct me if I'm wrong, if I misspeak, but under current guidance, then the overall system, that specific system, it's an unacceptable rating overall. My comment to that is the reason why I shared a little bit about the conversations that are occurring at headquarters, why that's so critically important. Because we hear the frustration. The frustration has been acknowledged. What your testimony has been with the Mississippi River Commission and expressing that frustration has been heard. And then Mike, of course, bringing your inputs to our command strategic review with headquarters and inviting you down with other levee drainage district commissioners and superintendents up and down the entire river to provide that feedback that you're describing and bring it directly to our leaders at the headquarters level is extremely valuable. We understand this frustration. Of course, you know, at the execution level within a district, you know, we're governed to move out by regulation and policy, but I think the important takeaway is, and the reason why I wanted to share what I did is give you some insights on some discussion, potentially put myself a little bit at risk of what's being discussed, but that's okay, because I really want you to know that your voice is being heard, the frustration is known, and that those conversations are happening, and I'm very much aware of, specific to inspections, Mike, that there's another iteration and change in terms of how those inspections will be conducted. But I always try to talk about within the Corps of Engineers is, anytime there's a change, how are we going to implement that? So that we minimize what I always call the shock effect to our partners or stakeholders that have to live under that potential change. We haven't necessarily done that extremely well in the past, and certainly have heard that from all of you. So one of the things that I pressed my staff, and I've actually just had a discussion with Mississippi Valley Division to keep keep pressing with our headquarters that if there's going to be a change to the inspection standards, again, how are we implementing that? What's the transition period so that there's time to react? If we are truly going to take a larger perspective rather than the inspection in a finite space and start looking at evacuation plans and action plans, does the levee drainage district have a great maintenance plan to upkeep the levee drainage district, and it's demonstrated? Why wouldn't that be part of the criteria of being eligible in the rehabilitation program? So I'll pass the mic to anybody else who makes comments.
I would just like to say that I think that is a very important part of this, is we are listening. There is a lot of evidence out there that the folks throughout the Corps are really looking at ways to try to improve upon the situation. And so I think in the coming months and years, you'll see some progress toward getting a little bit more of an approach where we're providing more of this technical support and helping to guide levee districts on reducing risk more so than maybe the way we've done it over the last couple of years.
Russ, please.
Just a kind of follow-up. Part of our frustration, and goes back to the date you just said on the 408. You said 2005, I believe, and there was no 408 ever used in 2005 or 6 or 7 or 8. The 408 permit system was not used by anybody in the Midwest or anything to do with flood control drainage districts until maybe 2009 or 10. The idea of going back retroactively applying regulations that were never used at the time is extremely frustrating for us.
This is a great topic that I know I've dialogued with the St. Levee Drainage District and others about. And what I always like to describe is, so there's always a little bit of confusion. And so maybe we're at fault in some ways, maybe in the deep past, and how we have articulated the differences over time between Section 408, Section 208, and then what is this new engineer's, well, it's not new. As of July 2014, if I recall, the engineer circular that's out. So let me describe a little bit about the distinction between the three. First, Section 408 is a statutory. Okay, it's been around since I believe 1899 off the top of my head. Section 208 has been around since about the 1940s. Section 208, typically, that language is an annex within your operations and maintenance manuals. It's been around since the 1940s, before many of your levee drainage districts were federally improved or built, depending on the levee drainage district. The 208 language, since it's been around since the 1940s and is codified in the operations manuals for the levee drainage districts, discusses alterations or improvements either over, through, under the levee drainage, the levee, and how, if there is such a request, and it's a federal levee system, so if you're altering or modifying a federal levee system to request approval. So that's a difficult distinction. Statutory, then there's Section 208, which is codified in the O&M, and then you have the engineer circular. And so to clarify the engineer circular, which I believe came out in July 2014. What the engineer circular is, it describes the standards for a 408 request, and most importantly, it provides the guidelines by which an engineer district will evaluate that 408 request. And Russ, I know I'm not answering 100% of your question. For the collective, and we certainly can talk more, but for the collective audience, I think it's important for all of us to understand the distinction between the three, because I have picked up, and you've informed me very well and brought me up to speed, is there has been confusion of what those distinctions are, and that's clearly noted.
Honestly, I was avoid stepping on this grenade, but having been a kind of a bystander to it and kind of in a supporting role, I just leave you with my thoughts on this. And I think Greg is spot on and talks about the evolution of PL 8499 and the transition from Section 208 to 408, the engineering circular. But one of the things we tend to do that I've seen is we make a lot of this specific to one area. And the challenge you have is when we look at these things of national policies that have applications throughout, they need to be viewed from that context as well. And so the solutions that you seek has got to be from the context that it's applicable to all throughout. And so though that is a very, very challenging problem that we have specific to you all, to the SNI, that is, the solution has to be one that is applicable to all. And that is the greatest struggle that we have in terms of trying to address. So your question I understand in terms of how can you be viewed as national top performing, doing all the right things, and then all of a sudden be viewed differently. Remove that thought and look at it from the other aspect. Because whatever solution we have has to be one that can apply to any district, regardless of a situation or problem or circumstance. And that is a trouble. It's a challenge, not only for you all, but it's a challenge for us. We speak of, with transition, the uncertainty and the opportunities that come about. The only way we can capitalize on those things is we remind ourselves to be adaptable, flexible, and versatile in our thought. And that's listening to you, taking in your concerns, your issues, and from our perspective, trying to address those. And it's not easy by any degree. I would love to say that we can do this at the turn of a dime, and we talk about, you can't turn a battleship on a dime. But I witnessed the ship turn, and it can turn. It just takes a little time. And so I ask that you continue to work with us and continue to be collaborative and bringing forth possible solutions and ideas that we can exercise for you in hopes that we can get a solution that applies to all.
And really, one of the things that we're seeing under the Levee Safety Act, the main purpose was to reduce risk. And we're not seeing that in these inspections. Nobody's looking at, hey, this particular district, you're protecting a lot. You've got a low area in this particular area. It's not being addressed. We're not looking at the number one risk, and this is the Corps' own studies, that the biggest threat is overtopping failure. And I'll give you an example on your most recent survey work. We have the industrial levee right here in Burlington that is below authorized. To me, the Corps should be jumping up and down and saying, hey, we've got a high risk here. You guys we need to get this improved. You're not identifying the real risk. So that's one thing that I'd like to see that change and improve. The other thing is learning by our experiences. And what we've seen in 93 and 2008 is when we have, unfortunately, and Colonel Mitchell's lucky because he's dealing with a lot of dirt levees, but the Rock Island District is dealing with sand levees. And the standards for being a half foot higher or even a foot higher at the upper end on a sand levee is totally inappropriate. We're seeing when we have a failure through a sand levee that opens up 1,000, 1,300 feet, extremely expensive to do a repair. Those are risks that should be identified and under practice, encouraging that these upper sand levees be further improved to make sure that you don't have a failure in every other district. And we've seen the disaster in several districts. so much more significant when you have it occur in, at the upper end of the district. The elevations in many areas, Hunt Lyman, for example, it was an area that caused a great deal of damage that would not, if it would have come in at the right location. Of course, in that case, you had, failure right on the Corps of Engineers property there at Block and Dam initially. So all these things really need to be identified further in risk. And then the third thing that maybe you can address is prior approvals. What we've seen historically is that the process was outlined in these O&M manuals to do the 20810. That was to have that initial meeting with the Corps of Engineers to say this is the project we want to do. The project's completed, it needs to meet the standards, and those as-built construction documents were turned in. And we've seen significant inconsistency. Sometimes that got included in the O&M. Sometimes we got a 208 letter. I think I can only find one or two examples. But most of the times they'll say, okay, you're done with the project. That these prior approvals that are supposed to be recognized are not being fully implemented. So maybe one or two comments, but maybe you could address this prior approval is the main question.
Okay, reference, I'll go to the first one, if I could, Mike, real quick. So, levee inspections, levee safety, identifying the true risk was the first question. And the comment that we're not really addressing the real risk. So one of the things that we're doing right now that's near implementation, actually, I think St. Louis has already executed a pilot on this. So one of the things we're doing is formalizing how we, the Corps, in levee safety, communicating risk, not only with the levee drainage districts, but also multi-echelon, so there's awareness of what those risks are. Because obviously we're all in the public safety business. So I'll share an example with you. Traditionally, as you know, what you get is an inspection report, right? So what you get told is, this is where there are deficiencies in the system. But that doesn't address, I think, Mike, where you're going with this is, so how does that connect to the risk of the system? And how are we defining that risk? And then how do we create understanding not only with the levee drainage district, but also that it's communicated with other federal agencies, the general community? Because honestly, risk should be transparent. People should know what their risk. I know levee drainage districts sometimes get guarded because there's a lot of pride in the upkeep of levees. No one wants to hear there's risk with their levee system. But I will tell you that there's always some level of risk with any levee drainage system, any levee system, regardless of how well it is maintained and operated. So one of the things that we're doing is we're formalizing how we're going to communicate risk with our levee drainage districts and others. For example, not just the inspection, Mike, but also levee screenings. Levee screenings that take the inspections as part of the input. It's also the input of levee drainage district. Looking at it from more than just an inspection of a defined space, and then defining that risk across the system or systems within the levee drainage district. So sharing of levee screenings, so you know what an LSAC rating 1 is. It doesn't communicate with anybody. Defining that out and why it's being classified as such is what's more important. So we're making a concerted effort. Matter of fact, part of the round robin that I've asked Alan Tam, who's our levee safety officer within the district, for example, that we're going to have at our levee outreach meeting that I described here coming in later in March, is one of the stations, and he's building packets. We won't have them all done, but he's working on packets so that we can have a one-on-one dialogue with you and have a communication what the risks are truly for your system or systems. And so, duly noted, Mike, I think there's improvements being made in that front, and I think you're going to see traction here in the very near coming months in that regard. Part of that risk, acknowledging the sand levee and the risk associated with the second question. Overtop sand levees are very unique. When you have an overtop condition, catastrophic failure, there is a higher risk associated with that. And that has to be captured in these levee screenings, no doubt, so that we communicate that effectively. In terms of prior approvals, This is another area where when you're involving multiple agencies, FEMA, Corps of Engineers, and then the applicable state, each of which are governed by their own policy regulations and have their process to implement that policy regulation, right? Where the confusion lies, and rightfully so, is how do those all interconnect, right? If you're exercising a process by which you are seeking accreditation, which is owned by FEMA, they have a process for that. Part of that process is seeking approvals both at the state and federal level, or potentially county or municipality, depending on where your levee drainage district or system resides or is. There's been a lot of dialogue with FEMA about not only now, but in the past, what was required for accreditation. What were the standards at the time? Like, I've talked about this, not the standards now, but what were the standards at the time? And what I keep hearing and I'm learning is, and I don't want to speak for FEMA by any stretch of the imagination, but what I keep hearing collectively is that there's three major components. There's the certification process. There's local and or state permissions, and then there's the federal permissions component. I'm not so sure that was, how well that was communicated back in the late 1990s or communicated in the early 2000s. And I've learned a lot from all of you on how well or what it was not communicated and truly what was approved and what's not approved. And that's why I think it's important that the reason why we're reaching out with specific levee drainage districts on that very problem that you're describing, Mike, as your question number 3, is why we've initiated a dialogue with the levee drainage districts and ourselves, because we have to understand how we got where we are and then move forward from that. And so that's something we're looking hard at, and it's not just one or two. There's a handful out there, and we're committed to doing that and having that dialogue. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Baumgartner, you mentioned that part of the understanding for forecasting and prediction is some of the hydraulic modeling. How was Rock Island, St. Louis done as far as, do you have hydraulic models on different parts of the Mississippi and the Illinois River?
Okay, so specific to hydraulic models, one of the things I failed to mention, and I think I know where you're going, is when you do a hydraulic model, it doesn't mean you start from scratch. And Mike, you and I have talked about this too, is, there is data out there. There are levee drainage districts that have hired engineer firms, for example, that have done hydraulic modeling because maybe they were working towards one of the critical steps of submitting a 408, for example. We would be foolish if we weren't taking that data. Of course, we're going to leverage the data that we have to advance that model. That's the cost-effective way and efficient way of doing that. So we'll definitely leverage the data we have. Does that answer your question? I want to make sure, I think I heard you correctly, but we are going to leverage other segments.
Yeah, I was wondering if you're doing large-scale models for the whole pool to help for that prediction and forecasting, or focusing on small levee or small area models.
Yeah, so there's a couple different, we might be confusing flow frequency studies, hydraulic modeling, and then there's, river gauges and forecasting to have predictability for any potential floodplain or flows with our levee drainage districts. Can you clarify which one of the 3 maybe?
I was actually talking about all 3, but.
Okay.
I guess I was looking more for the forecasting and predicting portion of it, which would be more of the hydraulic model.
The forecasting and predicting part of it, I think, is currently done through National Weather Service, and we use their data definitely. As far as the hydraulic modeling, as the Colonel mentioned earlier, we are working on a hydraulic model that would take care of from Keokuk down to Thebes, and so that is underway, and eventually we hope to have the rest of the system modeled so we're able to have a complete model for the entire system.
Okay, so I know we're on the hook, Aaron, and we've eaten up some of your time. Of course, that's on me, that's my fault. I've always been accused of being long-winded, so I apologize for that. But I do really appreciate the comments and questions, and I'm here for the rest of today, and I know the team is too. So look forward to ongoing dialogue, and look forward to meeting with you on some of the venues I mentioned earlier. Thanks.